Welcome to our drought management webinar. In light of current on-farm grazing and grass growth conditions, we hope to provide you with clear and practical updates on how to manage the situation and how this would impact your farm. There will be a Q&A option with all the speakers at the end, so please type your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. We will hear from Ailish Byrne. She will give us an overview on the weather support package, and we will hear from Bryan Harte with an update on grass and feed planning and supplementary feed options, as well as protecting your forage reserves on the farm. But first, we will hear from our chairman, Ger O'Brien. Chair, over to you.
Thank you, Joris, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Ger Bryan. I'm chairperson of Tirlán. Across many parts of the country, farmers are experiencing challenging conditions due to prolonged dry weather, with significant pressure now being felt on grass growth, feed supplies, and farm management decisions. As a farmer-owned cooperative, we understand these challenges and remain committed to supporting our members through this period. Earlier this month, Tirlán launched a 1.7 million support package for our milk suppliers, including rebates on feed, cereals, straights and fertiliser, to help farmers respond to the immediate challenges created by the dry conditions. Alongside this financial support, our advisory and technical teams are working directly with suppliers to provide practical guidance and on-farm support. Today's webinar is part of that effort. Our technical team will share practical advice on feed planning, nutrition, animal welfare, and the support measures available to farmers. Every farm is different, and there is no one-size-fits-all solution. The aim today is to provide practical information that can help farmers make informed decisions and reduce pressure later in the season. I encourage you to submit any questions through the Q&A function during the session, and our panel will address as many as possible. Thank you again for taking the time to join us. I hope you will find this discussion useful and informative. I will now hand you over to Ailish Byrne, our Chief Agribusiness Officer, to provide an overview of the support measures available to milk suppliers. Ailish.
Okay, thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, everyone. As our Chairman outlined, Tirlán launched a support package for our milk suppliers on the 9th of July, so that was 2 weeks ago today, and the aim of that was to help you all to manage the dry weather conditions. The support package includes a €40 per tonne support payment on 30,000 tonnes of gain dairy feed, a €10 support payment on 10,000 tonnes of Irish rolled cereals, €3 per tonne support on 10,000 tonnes of straights, and a €20 per tonne support on 20,000 tonnes of fertiliser. The qualifying period for the support commenced, as I said, on the 9th of July and will end with all deliveries on farm by the 8th of August 2026. And to ensure that we can get everything delivered on farm by the 8th of August, we're asking that all final orders are placed by the 5th of August at 1 p.m. There are no qualifying criteria for this support. All Tirlán milk suppliers will qualify for these support payments. Fertiliser charged to any account will qualify for the rebate value, and the rebates will be paid into Tirlán September trading accounts. With all our support packages, a reasonable usage limit will apply. So what this means is that somebody has 100 dairy cows, that we expect that the farmers would just buy the feed needed for those 100 cows. I do have one ask for everybody on this call, and that is to get your feed orders in as soon as possible. Mills are very busy. Transport is also very busy, so we would appreciate your support on this matter with our support package. I'm now going to hand over to Bryan Harte, who's going to give you all some practical advice on how to manage these conditions.
Thank you, Ailish, and good afternoon, everybody. So what I'm going to do over the next, say, 10, 15 minutes is probably just try focusing on some of the practicalities that we need to implement on farms and go through probably 3 of the most common diets that we're seeing and maybe just troubleshoot some of the different issues that we see with them and some of the pitfalls and some of the benefits. But before we get into, say, some of the practicalities and the different diets, I think it would be good to give a snapshot as to where we are at the moment in terms of a soil moisture deficit and what is driving this slowdown in growth. When we look at, say, our soil moisture deficits, we see in parts of the Tirlán regions, some of them are after crossing 80 mils of soil moisture deficit. Now, simply put, what does this actually mean in practicalities? When we have a 50 mils of a soil moisture deficit, this is when we see grass significantly slow down in growth. This is what we were seeing 10, 12 days ago. As we started heading towards 70 and now touching 80 and above, we're beginning to see now grass deteriorate and we're actually losing grass in some fields. And we'll touch on some of the practicalities around that as well. I think this does need to be called out as well, that we will need a significant amount of rainfall for this to turn around. Realistically, we will need 35 to 40 mils of rain to get back down below 50 mils, and that's even getting rain in the near future. So we do need to be realistic as to where we are, and it will take us some time to come out of this when we eventually do get the rain, and we'll cover some of those points later. So as we look to, say, some of the practicalities or what do we see as the real key important things and some of the things that were being asked, the first and most important thing that we always will see is that we want to keep cows healthy and productive. That is always going to be at the fore of any decision we make around any diet that we put together. In reality, we have still 40 to 45% of the year's milk solids or income for many farmers yet to be produced and paid out. So this is why we want to try protect cow health and performance at this moment. We can see at these times when cows drop excessively in milk yield, it is very hard to get both their yield and protein constituents back up. So this is why we want to focus on maintaining cows' production at this moment. When we look to, say, the most common phone calls that are coming into us at the minute, it's probably touching on that point we mentioned earlier, where we have some grass on farm. It's the drier parts of it, but we walked by it yesterday and we saw it today, and there's less grass in it today than what there was yesterday. It's that question, should I get in and graze that off as quick as possible because we seem to be losing it? And the answer for us in these drier parts is very much yes. You have grass on the farm, and if you are losing it in those drier parts that are hitting 75, 80 mils of a soil moisture deficit, you need to get in, get that off and utilize that grass. After that happens, or in all other situations, we would encourage people to be on a 25 or a 30-day rotation. There's a number of reasons for this, but firstly, how do we get a 25-day rotation? Well, if we have 100 acres, we simply divide 25 into 100. That's 4, so that's 4 acres per day. There's a couple of reasons we want to do this. Number one, this is actually the right thing to do for grass recovery. We will still grow a very small amount of grass in some of our drier areas, okay? And what we want to do is get the cows in on that 4 acres, whatever's grown in the last 25 or 30 days, graze it and get off and let it recover and for the next grazing or whenever the rain falls as well. We often get asked about, should I just not have a sacrifice paddock? I'll put 5 or 6 ring feeders in there and the cows will go into it and let the rest of the paddocks recover. In our experience, we have seen some issues with this back over in the past. If we think back to 2018, the most significant drought year we would have had, where we would have seen excessive use of sacrifice paddocks, where large amounts of, say, dung would have built up, we would have ended up with long-term cell count problems that would have taken a number of years to correct. So this is another reason why we would like to see people go on to a 25 or a 30-day rotation. There are a number of actions that we can to either extend or replace grass. They're everything from removing additional stock. We were talking to a bunch of farmers yesterday and they were looking at some of the lower producing cows and getting rid of some of them to reduce the demand on farm. We can also look at bringing in, say, some of the second cut silage area if it's not cut already through either grazing or zero grazing. And then of course we look at introducing silage and concentrate, which will make up the vast majority of the solutions on farm. But with all these solutions, there will not be one solution that will fit all farmers. Every solution will be different depending on the farms. And one thing we will say is please get in contact with ourselves or any of your advisors to actually find out what suits your farm the best. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through 3 different diets and just troubleshoot them basically and see some of the pros and cons of it. The very first diet we're going to look at is probably the most common one that we have seen over the last week or 10 days, okay? This is a farm that basically has 7 to 10 days grass left ahead of it, okay? And what we're ultimately going to do here is we're upping the concentrate and introducing silage to extend out that grass and keep it there for as long as possible, okay? And ultimately what we're going to do here is a third of the diet is going to be grass, a third of the diet is going to be silage, and a third of the diet is going to be concentrate. Now we're not going to get into dry matter contents or dry matter percentages. We'll keep this incredibly practical. If this was a 100 cow herd, to implement this diet, we would have to feed 3 to 3.5 bales per day. Then we would be feeding 6 to 7 kilos in the parlour, and then we'd have to have enough grass to satisfy their intakes after that. 6 kilos of dry matter grass is generally what they're going to be taking in 6 to 7 hours of good quality grazing. This is the most straightforward diet we have. This is the one that we see probably the most amount of people in at the moment, and it's generally speaking, once your silage is above 70 DMD, this is supporting 22 to 24 litres, which is generally average yield of what we're dealing with at the moment within Tirlán. But as we go on and we see that this diet begin to, as time goes on, grass will begin to run out. So we're left with a couple of options then. What do we actually do here? If we have good quality silage and plenty of silage, and we'll come back to that comment in a minute, if we do have plenty of silage, the easiest thing here is basically start increasing the amount of silage. We're going very close to basically a winter diet. In the winter, we have no grass. So what do? We generally feed between 6 to 8 kilos of concentrate and good quality silage, and that will support a decent level of milk production, okay? As you can see here, the cows are getting out for a few hours to get 3 kilos of grass, but all we're after doing from the previous diet is after introducing additional silage. Very simple, very straightforward, but we're after increasing the silage bale intake in a 100 cow herd from 4 to 4.5 bales per day. That generally is quite straightforward, and probably the next and our final scenario here in our final diet is generally the one that we're actually seeing in the last 3 to 4 days more so popping up. We would like everyone to take away from this call, just consider your own winter forage stock situations. We have seen a lot of silage being made, which was excellent earlier on in the year, but we are now using quite a bit of silage. For those people that are doing that, their silage budgets and realizing they might be on the tighter side as we head into the winter, this diet is an excellent option to be able to stretch silage while also maintaining production. Ultimately, what we're doing here, instead of increasing the silage, we're now introducing soya hulls, about 3 to 3.5 kilos of soya hulls as a midday feed. This will deliver the same amount of energy to support that 22 to 24 litres, and we're not having to use the excessive amount of silage that we were in the previous slide there as well. Depending on people's facilities, the midday feed might not be practical. Not everyone has the feed space, so on and so forth. So as I said, there's different options available. So please get in contact with us or pop your questions into the chat, and we will be able to answer them then as well. I do think with say that last diet that we went through, we do need to look at we are beginning to push the levels of concentrate intake. Anytime that we are beginning to push the levels of concentrate intake, and we have a slide coming up on it, we do need to look out for any digestive upsets, loose stongs. It's often advisable, just when we are doing that, make sure we have something, a long fibre source like a straw bale for cows to roughage at if they require. Joris will cover later on about water demand and the requirement for water, but as we are introducing more concentrates, cows' requirement for water will increase. So we do need to make sure that we have a significant water flow and water available to cows, specifically after the milking time. This is the time when they have the biggest amount of demand demand for water. There's very few things that you can do within 12 hours to a cow to really impact the next milking. Water and water availability is one of those things. If we mess around with water or stricter intake, we will immediately see a reduction in milk volumes as well. And as I've said a number of times, we want people to really start considering their silage availability for the coming winter. A lot of silage is being fed, and a lot of silage will realistically be fed over the next little while now. So we'd encourage people to start putting their plans into place. Ailish touched on it earlier on about getting orders in. I think we need to start looking at potential fertilizer for some of a late third cut to make up some of this. So all we'd ask is to start planning now. We often get the call, say, at this time as well, when concentrate levels start increasing significantly, that how far is it safe to be pushed? And very simply, on a dry matter basis, it's a 50-50, 50% concentrate, 50% forage. So when we start looking at what that is in practicalities, it's basically 10 kilos of concentrate. We're never going to feed all that through the parlour, and this is on the extreme levels of it. So we generally look at feeding 5 kilos in the parlour and 5 kilos at the head barrier or something like soya hulls. Okay. Calves are on a lot of outblocks at the minute and are probably being, we're getting the question, what should we be doing with calves, or how do we keep them happy? It's quite easy to keep calves and even weanlings happy. A round feeder and a couple of kilos of concentrate each day will keep calves exceptionally happy. The diet that we have there now is one probably from a farm where we were actually trying to save on silage as well. So we're after pushing the concentrate up to 2.5 kilos for those calves there at the minute. That's probably where we see the limit of where overall concentrate intake is for calves. And we do need to look at the positives and say when the rain actually arrives, and it will of course eventually arrive, but we do need to put plans in place at that time. When we look back, history has taught us there, as rain arrives, if people stop feeding at that stage and we race around and snip off whatever grass, people will run out of grass very, very quickly. When we do eventually get to rain, we want people to maintain feeding for about 10 days, and that will allow grass to build up. At that stage, we'll be very close to building grass for the autumn rotation plan. So that's what we're going to try and encourage people to do. Don't let the handbrake off the minute we get the rain, and continue feeding. Allow the grass to build up. The other point that we see after a long dry spell, when we get rain, we get an exceptional amount of lush grass. This can often be quite unpalatable for cows and very low in fibre. So we see quite loose dungs, and we even see high milk ureas there as well. So we'd again encourage just allow a bit of access to long fibre, but this should be negated by the feeding that we will continue for the first 10 days after we get a significant amount of rain. Fertilizer, why are we talking about fertilizer in the middle of a drought? I do think we need to start thinking about how much or when we will spread it. Realistically, land is mineralizing nitrogen away the whole time, and it's releasing in or around half a unit of nitrogen each day. That fertilizer, that nitrogen is staying there, it's not going anywhere, and will be available to the plant when we get rain. We need to consider this when we're going and spreading our bag fertilizer. We won't need to go with the normal full rates. Land and grass is not lacking nitrogen at the moment, it's lacking moisture. There will be plenty of nitrogen there, so we'd encourage people to cut back their fertilizer applications and maybe not rush out with fertilizer straight away. Allow the rain to do its work. There'll be plenty of nitrogen sitting there in the background. So in summary for myself, before I pass back over to Joris, we realistically want to always keep the cow and our health and performance as the key thing we consider. There's still over 40% of the year's milk solids yet to be produced from the 1st of August onwards. We don't want to see cows slipping away, because it'll be very hard to get them back, and often milk that has lost at this stage of the year will be lost for the remainder of the year. Acting early will always give the best results. This is either for extending grass or for maintaining production. Whatever it is, if we can just identify the issue, act early, we will always get the results. We want people to do their fodder budgets and start identifying any deficits. We need to consider how much silage we're going to be feeding over the next little while, and where that's going to leave us when we do come out of this drought. We need people to put a plan in place for fertilizer, a third cut if required. as we just went through, we need to be able to plan for the rain when it arrives. We need to do the right actions, continue feeding, offer some sort of long fibre, and don't go too heavy on the fertilizer in those early days just after the rain. And ultimately, we need to be able to find a solution that is right for your farm. And we'd always ask people and tell people that there is always assistance available. So please do get in touch with any of the members of the Tirlán team, and we'll try assist yourselves for the solution that's right for your own farm. So I'll just pass it over to Joris now, who's going to take you through.
Okay, thank you very much, Bryan. Yeah, I'll touch on a few, I suppose, points that are related to that, obviously, in drought conditions and in hot weather. Now, we'll talk about water supply requirements, and Bryan already touched on it. It's very important, so we'll definitely spend a bit of time on that. We'll talk about managing heat stress in cows, and then we'll go through a few key husbandry actions that you can take on farm today. So if we look at the water supply requirements, so for the daily water intake, right? This is very variable, obviously, as you know, between the age of the animal, the size of the animal, and the production level, right? So on average, you might see a figure quoted somewhere that says 70 litres per animal per day, but that's an average for all the animals on the farm. When you look at your young stock and your dry cows, they require about 20 to 60 litres per animal per day. But if you look at your milking cows, you're looking at double that, right? So 100 to 120 litres per cow per day. The quickest or the simplest calculation really is that per kilogram of milk that a cow produces, you should provide 4 to 4.5 litres of water, right? That's her water requirement as a whole. That's how much liquid she needs to take in, right? And Bryan already mentioned it's after the milking that she consumes the vast majority of that, really. 30 to 50% after each milking will be of the daily requirement will be consumed. Okay, so it is about providing that access to that volume of water for a large number of cows. Now, under I suppose normal grazing conditions, you could ask yourself these days, what is normal grazing conditions? But under normal grass conditions, okay, 50 to 60% of that water requirement needs to come from fresh water. So the grass actually provides a very significant proportion of that water. But under the current conditions where the dry matter of the grass has gone so high, more than 80% of the cow's water requirements are going to have to come from her drinking water. Okay, so again, you need that volume. It can't be like, and everybody's been staring at those pictures, an old bathtub that is covered in God knows what is not your solution. Okay, it is something like the setup in the bottom picture, where large troughs that are set up so that they can be accessed from either side of the wire, and you see the one close by, but then in the distance there is another one of these set up. So in each paddock on this farm there are at least 2 drinking points, and that gives cows an option. They don't have to walk to the other end of a paddock just to get some water. Okay, so that's what this is about. So keep in mind, to be able to provide clean fresh water to enough cows is vital in those dry conditions. Okay, now when we look at heat stress, and you might think, oh look, the sun isn't shining as brightly today, the temperature has dropped a little bit, heat stress isn't a problem. And you're not entirely wrong, but when we look at temperature alone, we would have to say that anything above 25 degrees Celsius is when a cow starts to suffer from heat stress. Okay, she falls outside of what's her temperature comfort zone. But heat stress is actually driven by what's called the temperature humidity index. And you can see temperature is only one part of the equation. Humidity is an important part as well. And so it could be that on a day like today, where we have a bit of cloud cover, the humidity is actually still such a level that even with a lower temperature, we still reach the threshold of 72. So you can see that in the table there on the right, that even at a temperature of maybe 22 degrees, it's not unimaginable to reach a higher level and get cows into heat stress. Now, in the last couple of weeks, I'm sure everyone has seen cows suffering a bit from heat stress, and you've seen the respiratory rate go up. The water intake obviously has gone up. Cows sweat more. Activity levels in the cows actually drop, and their feed intake drops. But expelling all that extra heat actually costs energy. So you see, as a result, milk production is dropping, milk solids are dropping, but also the cow's immune system is not as performant, and the fertility in the cows drops as well. So as a takeaway message from this slide, really think about water is key for regulating the body temperature, and it also helps then in the nutrients that the cow is digesting to take them in. It helps with the cow's metabolism, but it's also important to remove waste. Remember, urine and slurry has a high water content, and there is a reason for that, right? The water helps with expelling all the waste products from the cow's metabolism. Now, with lower forage intake, as we've seen in the last couple of weeks, also keep in mind that minerals and nutrients and vitamins such as vitamin A or phosphorus especially, their intake will drop as well. So you need to make sure that you amend the diet of the cow to make sure to still keep those levels in. And then in extreme heat stress, we will see that embryonic loss is possible. So that's something to keep in mind now that we're nearing the end of the breeding season for those that haven't finished already. So the key husbandry actions really in the current situation is, point number one really is provide adequate drinking water capacity and close to the parlour exit. Set your paddocks to incorporate at least 2 drinking points. Allow for shade from tall hedges or taller buildings for the daytime grazing paddocks, and then try and select paddocks closer to the yard as well for the daytime grazing. Consider housing the stock and buffer feeding them during the hottest parts of the day if that's possible. And then offer those additional minerals, so either through a lick or a bolus or extra concentrate feeding, just to make sure that you compensate for what they're not taking in through their forage, and try and limit the time spent in the collecting yard. The collecting yard is a high risk area, right? The cows are jostling for space, they're crammed together in a small area, usually not that much ventilation in collecting yards, and so it's try and avoid that as much as you can. Where you are using sheds or collecting yards in a parlour, make sure you can allow for extra natural ventilation, and then don't forget about fly treatments, okay? Especially if wind speeds die down, flies become an issue. And because the cow's immune system is maybe not as performant, the risk of mastitis goes up. So it might be a good time to actually introduce a pre-spraying on your teats if you're not doing that already. Remember to wipe off the pre-spray with a dry piece of paper towel before you attach the clusters. And then the last point, don't forget about shade, ventilation, and water supply on the out farm. So that concludes my part. So just as a reminder, please put your questions in the Q&A. We'll start on those now. But also for those people that maybe joined the call a few minutes late and you wanted to see the very start of it, this webinar is being recorded, and this will be made available either later today or tomorrow at the latest. So you can watch it again from the start if you haven't been able to join. Okay, so I'm just going to have a quick look at the Q&A, and there's quite a lot of questions coming in actually. Some people having some very specific questions for their situation, but I might go to Bryan Harte first, really, and I'm going to combine a few questions here for you, Bryan. Right, so there's one attendee, a farmer, asking about butter, fat, and protein are dropping. The cows are on low grass covers and they're already getting 5 kilograms of meal per day. Okay, so what would be a situation there? But I'm going to combine it with the other question from somebody from the southeast, and they say we're actually getting near the end of a 25-day rotation. Where are we at, right? We're getting close on grass, I'd say, very tight. So should we house the cows day or night? Is that a solution? And then another person asking about, well, we're very short on grass, almost none. And we have, not enough silage for the winter yet. We're halfway through a second cut. But the rest is being brought into the rotation now, right, in the last 10 days. So maybe give us a bit of an idea of how in those situations would people manage. Low grass, milk solids obviously suffering, and preparing for more silage for the winter, obviously.
Thanks, Jar. So yeah, we'll take those kind of maybe individually there, okay? So the first one there was just touching on, say, the butter, fat, and the protein and overall milk solids dropping, okay? So as a nutritionist, we probably look at this the amount of energy, the amount of milk solids that is put out is a reflection of the amount of energy put in. So if we were to set up that diet, Joris, we'd probably, the first place we'd be looking is the quality of the silage. We'd go and actually test that to see what we're dealing with. And instead of just saying, I'm feeding 5 kilos, we should be looking at saying, well, we're going to match the amount of kilos to the amount of, to the quality of the forage there in it as well, all right? So that's the way we'd always try and approach that one. On the question of, say, the 25-day rotation, they're on a 25-day rotation and they're approaching the end of it there now, and they're ultimately going to run out of grass. I think that kind of speaks to that second scenario that I had there earlier on. It's a situation where there is going to be no grass out there. And ultimately, we would still like to keep people on, say, a 25-day rotation, even though there mightn't be that grass out there. It kind of touches on the question as well of should we be getting them housing the cows. Personally, myself, it's probably a lot easier. It's going to be a lot easier for farmers to be able to actually let cows out into a clean field, as opposed to putting them into a shed and having to go lime cubicles and whatnot like that. You know, so. As there's not grass in the diet and out in the field, we need to backfill that. What those options are, it's going to be farm specific, Joris. It'll be obviously silage is going to be the basis. If we're going to be tie-hand silage, then we're going to introduce something like soya hulls or so on and so forth into the likes of that diet. On the last bit of the question there was someone there that was beginning to run out of grass and probably not very confident in the amount of silage that they actually have. So we probably just need to get an established, do a fodder budget, see exactly how much silage is actually on farm, how much we expect to use in the next few weeks, and where that will leave us. I'd say the first place we need to start looking there is actually to grow a third cut silage crop. That's why we want people to maybe get their fertilizer out onto the farm, so that when the rain does come, we're not waiting on fertilizer to be delivered out, so that we have it there and ready to go to crops. Look, with every passing day as we head into the autumn, and if we were here this time next month, Joris, we'd be seeing reduced growth rates almost with every passing day with the reduced sunlight. So we'd encourage people to almost make their plan. Grass and silage is going to be the way that we will get out of here. We still have loads of the year left. Like, we'll be able to build up a massive wedge of grass to be able to produce a lot of milk very cheaply on for the remainder of the year.
Oh, very good, Brian. And actually, while we have you there, there's a question there on the fertilizer, actually, that you've called it out a few times now, but somebody is asking, I'm hearing not to spread fertilizer at the moment, but if that's the case, then why are we putting such an emphasis on it, and why is it even included in our weather support package?
Yeah, good point, yours. And it's the advice we have ourselves. We do not want people to, go out and spread too much fertilizer when we do eventually get the rain. It's not the right thing for the plant. It's not the right thing for the cow. It's not the right thing for water quality. So we'd advise not to do it. But we do have to look at this logically as well. Grass and silage are going to be the two cheapest things that we will have on farm for the next coming months. We want people to be focusing on, when we get out of this, to be able to grow as much grass and as much silage as we can. It is a massive logistical challenge getting out that much fertilizer out onto yard. If everyone waits until the day it rains and rings their branch or their local rep to get fertilizer out, we are going to face delays, and that's just being honest about it. So we would encourage people to get that fertilizer out into the yard, and that's ultimately the reason why we included it in the rebate. We want people to look at grass and silage as the way out of this, and we want to have the fertilizer out on the yard ready to go when we do get the rain.
Okay, very good. Ailish, a question for you. It's about ordering feed, and it's somebody in a scenario where they would like the feed, the concentrate, to be in the yard on Monday. When should they be ordering this in, given that the mills are at full capacity at the moment?
Yeah, thanks, Joris. So I suppose just the mills are very busy at the moment. They're coping, but they're under pressure. So we are encouraging all our farmers to get their orders in as early as possible, and that just allows the mills to produce the food and feed on time, and also to get the transport out. So where you have situations, and we're trying to accommodate all our milk suppliers, we know this is putting a lot of pressure on our farmers out on the ground also, but we do have situations situations where a farmer rings now and says, I need feed this evening or in the morning, right? So that puts big pressure on the mills in terms of getting that delivered out on farm. But as I said, you know, our position is that we want to support all our farmers. We know that our farmers are under pressure out there, so we do appreciate that. But also our mills and our transport teams are under pressure as well. So we're asking for everybody to work together and to try and support each other and to get your feed orders in as early as possible. Thank you, Yours.
Oh, very good, very good. Right, another few questions for Bryan, I think, because it's absolutely coming in hot and fast here. A very short one, actually. Is there a place for hay?
Yeah, look, there's always a place where a forage is just where to put it. Look, if we look at hay, is it going to be suitable for cows doing 22 to 25 litres and feeding high quantities of it? It mightn't be the most suitable feed, but if we were being offered hay, I think of an example there a couple of days ago, Yoris, of a farmer that was being offered hay, and ultimately he went and took it and he's going to feed it to dry cows later on, okay? And he's also going to feed it then when we do get the rain to act as that kind of very palatable buffer to get that kind of high fibrous material in. So there's definitely a place for it, but it's just about finding the right place for it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then I suppose the opposite end of the spectrum, then what sort of protein level should you be looking at? Is there you know, room for a higher protein note now, or what would you say is an ideal, let's say, midday feed to go into in terms of maybe straights or something like that?
Yeah, so I'll probably split that question out, Yoris, right? Because it's a question we get quite commonly now at the moment. And it's probably a question we even get in the springtime, like what protein nuts should I be feeding? We currently don't have any deficit or very little of a deficit of protein in a cow's diet. When we see milk yields dropping and milk protein dropping, that is not generally as a result of actually having too little dietary protein in the cow's diet. That is always most commonly a reflection of actual lack of energy, the amount of energy that the cows, kilos of feed that are going in there. We've seen a number of examples there where we've done out diets and feeding your 14% nut. There's loads of research after being done even within Ireland to show that feeding the lower proteins is not causing any issue. It's just we don't see the need to be going up into protein, the higher protein feeds. It is generally solved by making sure the cows are being fed enough. Like there's more protein in feeding 5 kilos of a 14% than there is feeding 4 kilos of a 16%. So that's what we ultimately want people to look at. Probably as you move to say towards the midday feeds, there's a number of options. Look, probably the most, if we look at it from a nutritional point of view, we want to feed something that's very safe. So that's something that's going to be high in digestible fiber, not too high in readily fermentable starch to avoid any digestive upsets. For that product is probably soya hulls at the moment. A lot of it being fed as that kind of midday feed or that feed to stretch out silage, or just even instead of to lessen the cost of the concentrate going into the parlour. We do see people feeding palm kernel at the moment as well. Palm kernel, it's a great feed in small quantities. Probably if you see a cow taking in more than 2.5 kilos of palm kernel, you know, it's not the most palatable feed for cows. So if you see cows willingly taking in more than that, it's probably a sign that they're being pinched nutritionally somewhere else in the diet. Okay, but we have loads of people there now. Ailish went through our support package earlier on. There's €10 per tonne off native rolled cereals at the minute. We see a lot of people begin to introduce rolled barley there as their midday feed, and is absolutely fine. Thanks, Charles.
Oh, very good. And keep the questions coming in, everybody, please. They're very good, actually. And I have a quick question there for, I think, maybe Jerry, you might be best placed to answer this one. In terms of the weather support package, how long do you reckon the co-op will be able to keep that in place?
Thanks, Charles. So look, we kind of preempted this situation. I suppose 2 weeks ago, we came with the current package that is there, but as 100% own co-op, we will keep this situation under review going forward, and we'll keep it under review at board level. Okay, thank you.
Very good, very good. I have another question on the fertilizer spreading, actually. So I'll read it out to you because it's a very detailed question. Maybe Bryan, you're probably the best one to answer this one. The fertilizer definitely isn't my forte, but the question is: we spread the last round of fertilizer on the 10th of June. Hoped to go again early July, but conditions have not allowed. Should I spread ASAP as soon as rain? Just worried about the nitrogen uptake and embryonic deaths.
So if I was in that position, Joris, and depends on when we get the rain. But as I said, their land is naturally mineralizing nitrogen away there with every passing day. That is a bank that has been built up there at the minute. That's not going anywhere. That is available to the plant straight away. So when we do get the rain, we'd often see, and it'll depend on when we get the rain, but I think an awful lot of people are going to get away with half-rate fertilizer in that first round just to keep that thing ticking over to get it going. You touched on early embryonic death there. I think that's very much linked there at times with those high milk ureas, high levels of blood urea, which obviously end up in the milk as well, are not favourable for embryos. So we don't want to put the cows into a position where we spread a lot of nitrogen and that's available to the plant. And then we also have a high level of nitrogen after being built up through mineralization, and the plant takes all of it up, and that's how we end up with very rank green grass. Not good for cows, not good for milk, not good for embryos, and not good for water quality either.
Yeah, very good, very good. I see there is a question in there, and maybe Tara might actually come back to you on this one. And it's more about, I suppose, the Tirlán advocacy and making a case with the department for a little bit of extra fertilizer. Maybe once off this year, just to try and grow that third cut. Is there an option there for Tirlán to do that as a co-op, or is there ways in which we already try and influence the department that you can maybe give a little bit of detail on?
Yeah, thanks, Jarrah. So, as a co-op, we are always in constant contact with the department on, a range of different issues. I have no doubt, but if, the need arises, we will do that in this situation as well. We always get a good hearing from the department on these matters. Thanks, Jarrah.
Very good, very good. And there's a question in there for me, actually. It has to do a topic that we haven't touched on at all in this webinar. It's about lameness, likely to become a significant issue in herds that are increasing their buffer feeding, and so animals spending more time on concrete around the yards. And that is absolutely a significant issue in some yards. A lot of it has to do with providing enough feeding space then for your animals. Okay, so make sure that you have that 60-70 centimeters per animal to be able to feed, so that there is no competition, or not too much competition for when the animals are being forced, I suppose, to stay in the yards to eat, and try and give them as much time out in the paddocks as possible. Okay, so if that is an option for you, they are still better off out on the paddocks, but with the buffer feeding, try and make sure that you have the space for them, that there is always enough feed being pushed up to them as well, that they're not having to overstretch, that they're not putting too much pressure on their front feet trying to reach that last bit of silage that might be put in front of them. And just make sure that the cow comfort is there, right? And Bryan touched on, do you want to be using cubicles or not? If the cows are in for a significant amount of time, make sure the cubicles are ready for them, that cubicle comfort is there, that the cows can lie down in clean cubicles. It's not the time of year you want to be doing that, but if needs must, so it is about managing this then as a house cow situation, and dealing with it in that sense. Okay, so I think there's a few more questions, and very individual herd specific. What I would urge people, that where you have very detailed questions on a very specific situation on your farm, and we have a good few of them actually, we touched on a few of them, we went through a few of them, and Bryan showed some scenarios, but I would urge everybody to pick up that conversation with your local Tirlán representative, so your business manager, your branch manager, or with the local Tirlán milk solids growth specialist, obviously, in terms of nutrition and fine-tuning that for the farm based on the situation that you have in front of you now, and what is the forecast for the next 10 days or 2 weeks for your farm, and at least you can make a plan that way. So I think that sort of summarizes all of those. just have a quick scan through the list of questions. No, I think we have them all covered there, everybody. So I think that's it. We might finish off there, and thank you all for attending this in a nice number, and hopefully we will talk to you again soon.